This is the first video in a new book series that I'm reading. So the name of this book is Watermelon Hill, and it was written by Delbert R. Caudill. Here's a picture of the cover, if I can get the glare off of it there. So a couple of years ago, his family, Dale, he calls himself Dale, and his son sent me this book. They thought that I would enjoy it because of the things that I talk about on Celebrating Appalachia, the things that I write about on Blind Pig and the Acorn. And it was published in 2005. Now, it's not a book that's readily available. I hope that I'll be able to share the information of buying it directly from the family. If that works out, I'll be sure to let you know. But I know that you'll really enjoy the readings either way. And you might find a copy floating around on the internet. Sometimes that happens. It ends up at bookstores, used bookstores, thrift stores, things like that. A good place to look for books I've found is bookfinder.com. You put in the name of the book or the author, and it just kind of populates all the different places that are available. And you can go ahead and see the price of what it costs if they're available. I've not tried for this one, so I'm not sure that it is. But it is a book I know you'll really enjoy. And we're going to start with the dedication that Dale put at the front of the book. This book is dedicated to all of my family, but most of all to my parents, Earl and Leela Caudill, and my brothers and sisters, Lawrence, Leela, May, Curtis, Edna, and Jack, without whom there would be no story. This book is about all of them, and much of the information came from them. I only wish they could all be here to read it, but unfortunately Mom and Dad and my older sister Leela, May, passed away several years ago. This book is also dedicated to my children, Stephen and Melissa, and all of their descendants, in the hope that in learning about their heritage, they will come to appreciate and feel a connection with it. My past is already a part of them, even if they don't know it. I really like that part. I'm going to read the acknowledgments too. I want to thank my brother Lawrence for making corrections and suggestions to improve these stories. It was his interest in our family genealogy that inspired me to write them. Also thanks to my brothers, Curtis and Jack, and my sister Edna for their input and suggestions, and to my Jewish Yankee friend, Alana, for her great help in editing. Also, a special thanks to my wife, Lola, for her constant and unfailing faith, understanding, and encouragement. She makes life worthwhile for me. I'm not going to try to read it. He's got some stuff in a different language, but gracias is the first part of it. I won't try to read the rest of it. So then we're about ready to start. It's interesting he put this part in, and this all plays in to help you understand the story better. So this is the deed to the farm where most of the stories took place at. A certain tract or parcel of land situate, lying and being in Lawrence County, Kentucky, on the waters of Lick Creek and Acres Farm, more particularly described as follows. So I'm not going to read all the numbers, but I think it's fascinating to read just the points of reference is mostly what I'm going to read. Beginning at a large walnut tree on the ridge on the line of Mrs. Willard Wilson, Mattie Acres Wilson, to the west gate post on another ridge, same course, to a stake in the old road at the Vest Ball Farm, thence with the old road, to the forks of the road near the Tom Shannon house, thence up the road, to the mouth of the lane, thence down the old fence row on the north side of the lane, to a white oak at the forks of the drain, corner of Tom Shannon and Albert Kepperton, same course, to a fall rock in the branch, thence running around hill with lower edge of cliff with the J.W. Acres line, to a sourwood on cliff, to a persimmon, to two persimmons on top of rock, thence straight down to the river, to a bunch of maples at the river, to a stake on the river bank, below the mouth of a branch or near George Riggs' line, thence leaving the river with Riggs' line, to a set stone where the old beach stood, to a stake in passway, to a stake in passway, to a stake and passway by the sourwood and rock, corner of Mrs. Millard Wilson, Mattie Acres Wilson, thence leaving the passage and running with her line to the beginning containing 69 acres more or less, Also, another tract adjoining the first described, beginning on the lower corner of the Frank Cochran land, thence down the Lavisa River to the Muncie corner, made by Childers and Maynard, thence up the hill to a cliff, thence running with the cliff to the Fall Rock branch, thence down said branch with its meanders to the beginning. There is reserved and not conveyed the old Acres graveyard and a road leading from the county road to graveyard, 12 foot wide. So really interesting. I skipped over all the feet and the numbers and all that, but so fascinating to think about all those places that they were referencing at that time when they deeded this land. So fascinating. Makes me wish I could go back and see every landmark and meet all those people that their land butted up against. So here's the introduction. I have no delusions that this is a great literary work. In fact, I'm sure that it is not. Nor do I expect to get rich or launch a writing career. This is just something I have wanted to do for years but kept putting off. I finally realized that if I didn't start, I might one day not have many memories to write about. What I do hope is that this little book will serve as a trip back home and back in time to those who grew up in the country during the 40s and 50s. If you grew up in the city, it may help you understand your country cousins a little better. I also hope that younger people will read it to give them a better appreciation of their parents and grandparents and of their own history. Now just settle back in your recliner, free up your mind, let it drift back to the past, and take a little trip to Watermelon Hill in eastern Kentucky. I can only hope that you enjoy reading this book a small fraction as much as I enjoyed writing it. Delbert R. Caudill. Moving to Kentucky. In Lawrence County, Kentucky, between the Big Sandy River and U.S. Route 3, about 3 miles south of Louisa, is a spot known as Watermelon Hill. It used to be on U.S. Route 23, but the route has now changed to Route 3. The river used to be called the Lavisa Fork of the Big Sandy, but that has changed also, and it is now known just as the Big Sandy. Nearly everyone in the area used to know where Watermelon Hill was, but the younger generation may never have heard of it. After the route changed and bypasses were built, all of the main traffic flow went on the new roads and just local traffic traveled past Watermelon Hill. Almost everything has changed, except my memories. The main reason Watermelon Hill is important to me is that I grew up there. That wasn't where I was born, but we moved there when I was 3. So that was where I spent my formative years. Watermelon Hill was very much a part of me, and I guess it still is. I am primarily writing this to set down some of my memories for my children, but if some other people find it interesting, all the better. This might have been better written by some of my older brothers or sisters, but since they haven't done it, I'm going to give it a shot anyway. I grew up as a poor farm boy in eastern Kentucky, not exactly a rare commodity in those parts in the 40s and 50s, but I am just as proud of my heritage as if my parents had been millionaires. Hopefully some of today's kids will also develop an appreciation and respect for the past and pass it on down to the next generation. Today is tomorrow's past, so please don't let it be forgotten. My name is Delbert Ray Caudill, known to most people today as Dale, and to my immediate family as Mickey. I was born at home, the youngest of 6 children, in Wayne County, West Virginia, about 7 miles from Fort Gay, just on the other side of the Big Sandy from Louisa, Kentucky. My earliest memory is of riding in a truck while we were moving to Watermelon Hill in Kentucky. I was 3 years old. My family said I cried when they took our stove out of the house in West Virginia. I guess it was a pretty traumatic event in my young life. Looking back, I know we were very poor, but we didn't think about it at the time. I don't think the kids even knew it. That was just the way it was, and we accepted it without question. The house I grew up in on Watermelon Hill was lacking in many ways, but was still an improvement over the house where I was born. That house only had 2 rooms, a kitchen and a bedroom, no bath, no electricity, no running water, and was home for 2 adults and 6 children. Whoever was the baby at the time slept with Mom and Dad, and the others had the remaining beds. There weren't enough beds to sleep everyone, so some of the younger ones had to sleep at the foot of the bed with the older kids' feet in their face. My oldest brother, Lawrence, 17 years older than I, joined the Navy shortly after I was born, but all the others moved to Kentucky in 1945. There were my sisters, Leela Mae and Edna, my brothers, Curtis and Jack, and myself. The farm was estimated at more than 100 acres of beautiful rolling land on top of a hill. My folks, with the help of my brother Lawrence, who had received some back pay from the Navy, gave $2,600 for it. My grandpa Thompson told my dad he must be crazy to pay that much for a farm. Real estate has gone up a little since then. I remember arriving at our new home and walking across the front yard in grass as high as my 3-year-old head. The house wasn't much, but it had 2 stories and actually had knobs on the doors. That's right. The old house just had wooden buttons to turn to latch the doors, like a barn, so we thought we were moving on up in the world. In later years, the house was remodeled and improved a lot, but we never built a new house or had a bathroom in the house the entire 38 years my parents lived there. Part of the remodeling was a new outhouse built by my brother Curtis and his children with some help from my dad. They even plastered it and installed electricity. I will attempt to describe the house as it was when we moved there. However, as I was only 3 at the time, most of the description is from my older brothers and sisters' recollections. There were 3 rooms downstairs, the kitchen, which was also the dining room and laundry, and 2 bedrooms, one of which doubled as a living room. The upstairs was one big room, which was later partitioned into 3 rooms and 2 closets. The exterior construction was board and batten with tar paper. The battens were not necessarily over the cracks, and where the tar paper was torn, a lot of wind got through. The house was not framed inside, just a stud maybe every 8 feet or so for a little support. That meant that the walls were only an inch thick. They were whitewashed inside, very dirty, with plenty of cracks for the wind to blow through. The floors were also one layer of plain boards, no subfloor, no underpinning around the outside, so the wind was free to blow through the floor too. The linoleum on the floor was so worn that you could see the grain of boards under it. The wind would lift it up so that we had to nail it around the edges. The house sat on stone pillars anywhere from 1 to 2 feet off the ground, depending on the slope. The foundation had settled so that there was a slope downhill from the fireplaces in the 2 front rooms to the outer walls, and from the living area to the back door in the kitchen. The roof was tin with lots of holes in it. When it rained, we had to catch water in every bucket, pot, and pan we had. My older brothers who slept upstairs said they could see stars through the holes as they lay in bed at night. There was no ceiling upstairs or downstairs, just bare rafters overhead. The new roof was the first improvement we made on the house as soon as new tin roofing was available after World War II. There was no insulation anywhere. I guess the main reason my folks bought the place was for the land. There was a coal-burning fireplace in both living bedrooms downstairs and a wood-burning cook stove in the kitchen, nothing upstairs. The only heat upstairs was what managed to seep up the stairway, so the older kids slept upstairs and the younger ones and Mom and Dad downstairs. We didn't waste any more heat than was necessary, so when supper was finished, the fire in the kitchen stove was allowed to go out. At bedtime, Dad would place some large lumps of coal on the fireplaces and cover them with ashes. This would allow a slow smoldering burn, which would usually last all night. In the morning, Dad would rattle the ashes out and put more coal on the fireplaces to build the fire back up. Meanwhile, Mom would be building a fire in the kitchen stove, and by the time we kids got up, the house had started to warm up. I took that for granted at the time, but I realize now the extra hardships our parents went through for us kids. There was a large wooden box behind the kitchen stove for firewood, and that was the first place I headed when I got up in the winter. Sometimes I would grab a leftover biscuit to tide me over until breakfast. With no insulation in the house, it was very hot in the summer and very cold in the winter. In the summer, temperatures in Kentucky sometimes get over 100 degrees, and we would go to sleep drenched in sweat. At that time, I didn't think it was so bad, but today, I'm spoiled by air conditioning. During dry spells in summer, we would run short on water for the animals. We had some springs on the farm, so the horses and cattle could usually get enough water, but the hog pen was closer to the barn and there was no spring there. We had a depression dug out to catch water when it rained, but in a dry spell we had to haul water. The hogs need water to wallow in to cool themselves as well as to drink. Near the acres line at the far end of our land, near the top of the highest ridge on the farm, was a spring that never went dry, even in the driest summer. Dad enjoyed telling people about that. We kept it cleaned out to collect water and had driven a pipe into the hillside as a convenient duct for the water. We would haul water from this spring on a wagon or sled for the hogs and chickens. Winter, on the other hand, could get below zero sometimes. Once when I was in high school, it got down to 16 below zero. When it gets that cold, you can hear a tree limb in the woods freezing and cracking open every few hours. They would sound just like a rifle shot. The winter sometimes posed problems for the animals worse than the summer. Water would freeze and the animals had nothing to drink. The horses would break the ice in the springs for themselves, and then the cows could drink too. But sometimes Dad would have to thaw water for some of the animals. I can remember Dad bringing wash tubs of ice into the house to thaw in front of the fireplace. There were no crops to tend in the winter, but there was always work to do. Animals to be fed and watered, coal and wood to be carried in, cows to be milked, etc. The simple act of going to bed in winter was an experience you would remember for all of your life. Mom always starched and ironed the sheets so they were like layers of ice to slide in between. When the fireplaces were banked with ashes for the night, there was very little heat downstairs and none upstairs. So when it was bedtime, we would bake ourselves in front of the fireplace to just before the point of combustion, then run and jump into bed while we were still hot. We had plenty of covers, mostly homemade quilts that Mom had made from our old clothes. In fact, we would have so many covers on us we could hardly move. It was not unusual if I had a glass of water in my room upstairs for it to be frozen in the morning, and I would wash my hands and face before breakfast in the ice water from the bucket left in the kitchen overnight. The exact acreage of the farm was unknown. The deed called for 81 acres more or less, but everyone who saw it estimated it at 120 to 150 acres. Dad once leased it out for oil drilling at 130 acres. The edges of the farm were steep hillsides, unusable for farming, but most of it, even though on top of a high hill, was fertile farmland. When my grandpa Thompson actually saw the farm for the first time, he begrudgingly admitted that maybe Dad wasn't quite as crazy as he had first thought. In later years, much of the farmland grew up and was reclaimed by nature, but for many years after we moved there, it was a working farm with pastures for the animals and fields for the crops. It was mostly a subsistence farm, growing what was needed to survive, but we always had plenty to eat and some produce to sell. Our farm was bordered on the west by old U.S. Route 23 and Lick Creek, on the south by the Shannons and Capertons, on the east by Lavisa Fork of the Big Sandy River, and on the north by George Riggs' land. More about him later. And Acres Farm. Going south from Louisa, the road to our farm turned left off of old U.S. Route 23, a little over 3 miles south of town by Cynthia's Chapel Church. The housing development that is now built on our old farm is named Cynthia's Estates. If it had been my choice, it would be Watermelon Hill Estates, but that was the developer's choice, not mine. The road followed Lick Creek for a short way, where our road took a sharp left and up the hill. The main road continued on to the Childress, Paynes, Duttons, Shannons, Roses, and Mrs. Fugate. More about her later, too. All of this road in from the highway was dirt or gravel, and our road from where it started up the hill was our private road, which meant we had to maintain it ourselves to keep it passable. no small job. What with rain washing it out and snow melting to make it a bog, the road continued winding through the woods, up the hill, then leveled off at a gate to the pasture field. The road continued through the pasture, past a group of plum trees on the right, to the other gate, then over a little knoll with an apple, peach, and cherry orchard on the left, then the garden, our house, and ended at our barn. We were on a dead-end road, and even when we finally got electricity, the power line ended at our house. To the left of the barn and extending down a point overlooking the river was the main apple orchard. We had Concord grapevines along the edge of the yard by the garden and more between the house and barn. There were blackberry vines along one side of the garden and huge wild blackberry vines in the woods near the acres property line. Scattered around the farm were several black walnut trees with delicious nuts. There were wild huckleberries, strawberries, raspberries, dewberries, a small low-growing blackberry, hickory trees with hickory nuts, very good, but the shell was like flint. You really had to work for what you got out of them. Also growing along the path to the river was a couple of what we called pig nut trees. The nut looked like a hickory nut, but was the most bitter thing I ever tasted. Always good for a joke on someone visiting or at school. Growing in the woods were persimmon trees with fruit that was very sour when green, very sweet when ripe, and pawpaw trees. The pawpaw is a fruit roughly the size of a stubby banana, ripe when the skin starts to turn black. It is sweet and pleasant tasting, but filled with a lot of large seeds. There were so many seeds, the fruit was hardly worth it, but I liked them anyway. With all these things growing wild, plus the large garden and orchards, we had plenty to eat, and Mom either canned, pickled, dried, made jelly, or in some way preserved almost all of it. Mom tried to fix up the house as soon as she could, as finances allowed. A top priority was the walls, as the wind was blowing right through them. Mom tacked cardboard onto the walls, then wallpapered over it. When she could afford real wallpaper, she bought it, but until she could afford it, she papered with magazines. I can remember many nights reading the walls and ceiling before going to sleep. That may seem very strange today, but when you're poor, you make do the best you can. Mom had a real green thumb. She had roses, flower beds, rings of rocks, or old tires with flowers planted in them all over the yard. No matter what the appearance of the house, the yard was always beautiful. Mom and Dad were poor, but they always had pride, did the best they could, and never accepted welfare, even though they could have qualified for it at times. Some people we knew did get assistance in the form of a check or government commodities, surplus food products. Once someone gave Dad some commodity cheese because it was more than their family could use. It was very good cheese, so I asked Dad why we couldn't get commodities too. He explained that it would be accepting charity and that he wouldn't be able to hold his head up in public if it was known that he couldn't support his family. I sort of understood, but I sure did like that cheese. Mom always kept the house and the kids clean. For all of my adult life, when I would run into people who at some time had been in our house, almost all of them commented on Mom's stove. It was a wood-burning cook stove, which meant that you cooked on the top of it, moving the pots and pans closer or farther from the end with the firebox to adjust the temperature. Most of the wood-burning stoves I've seen over the years had accumulated some burned-on food crust or rust on the stovetop, but not Mom's. As soon as the stove cooled down enough, Mom scrubbed it clean. It didn't just look clean, it looked polished. It seemed to make a lasting impression on most people who saw it. We didn't have much in the way of comforts as people are accustomed to today, but Mom and Dad loved to have company and always made them feel at home, no matter how many there were. Often we ran out of beds, so the kids slept on pallets on the floor and the company got the beds. I recall once when my grandma and Grandpa Thompson were visiting, the family gathered most of the country music talent in the neighborhood into our house for entertainment. I got a kick out of watching Grandpa Thomas pat his foot in time to the music. He could play anything with strings on it himself, so he thoroughly enjoyed the evening. My oldest sister, Leela Mae, was married in our house on Watermelon Hill. She married a local boy, Leroy Colvin, and they moved to a small house near the orphans' home, which was in the area of where the new middle school is now located. Sounds simple and peaceful, but their friends had other ideals. There was a tradition in Kentucky country called a shivaree. Basically, a shivaree consisted of anything and everything to annoy or embarrass the newlywed couple. All the young people from a mile or two around gathered at our house and more or less kidnapped them. They started off taking them for a ride on a cow and ended with an all-night serenade with horns, washtub drums, cowbells, anything that would make noise to disrupt their wedding night. So we'll stop right there with our first reading of this new book, Watermelon Hill. I really enjoyed the whole book. That's why I picked it, and I know that you will too. I hope you enjoyed this part as much as I did. The things that jumped out at me is just starting with this. One of the reasons I wanted to kind of read the deed. I didn't read all the numbers, and none of us have ever been there. It sounds like it's changed drastically, but that's the reason I wanted to read it, because of those drastic changes. I bet that you've probably been back to your old home place, or maybe you live like me. I live in the same holler that I grew up in, Wilson Holler, but oh my goodness, the changes that have happened in this holler. There's many houses now. When I was a wee little girl, when we first moved here, there was only 2 houses and a trailer and 2 houses. Now there's still a trailer there where that one was, a different one, but many houses. So many things that's changed. There used to be a pond down the road when I was a girl. That's where I learned how to swim. The pond's no longer there, gone in the name of progress. Just so many changes. It especially often happens, you hear people talk about when maybe they moved away from where they grew up, their hometown, and then they go back and they can't believe how the stores that are no longer there, lots of strip malls and things like that where there used to be farms, just so many changes. So that deed really, all those at that time, the walnut trees and this, and this creek and that, just so many changes that I'm sure you couldn't go back today and follow that deed as far as the contours if you tried to, just because so many changes, and natural changes happens too, trees die and fall over, lightning strikes them, forest fires, just so many different things. But I'm so glad that Dale decided to write down his memories, though. I think we should all do that in some form or another. And you think, like, who will care? I promise you somebody will care, even if it's not your family. If somebody finds it later on, if it's a neighbor, if it's somebody that just moved there, somebody will appreciate seeing through your eyes what you've seen. I think that's a wonderful thing for everyone to do, especially, though, for your family. I would ask Pap so many things I asked him over the years, and there's still things I wish I could ask him. And then sometimes I think about, even again, go back to where I live, Wilson Holler, the road that we live on, how it goes today. Pap told me it didn't go like that when he was a boy, and he showed me through the woods how it went. It was a totally different road. Now, when I was a girl, it was a gravel road. It's paved now. So that's a change that's happened in my lifetime. Even in Corey and Katie's lifetime, that change has happened. But I think about like where that road used to go. I'm sure my brother Steve knows that, maybe some of my other relatives. But then I think when we're gone, nobody will never know that the road that it was changed at some point, that it used to go a different way, totally different way. So there's simple things like that we need to write down. And it's always nice to, and Dale's kind of alluding to that, talking about how they went to sleep every night with the sweat and didn't even think about it because they didn't have air conditioning. But now looking back, it could make him so thankful for his air conditioning. I feel like that about air conditioning too. So when me and Matt first moved into our house, air conditioning wasn't real important to me. It was to Matt, but we'd run out of money, so there was not going to be any central heat or air. And we just lived, all those first years. We went through summers. Yeah, it was hot. We had fans. We had ceiling fans. We opened the windows, shut them during the day. We tried all the tricks that people tell you to do. But it was just life. That's just how we made it. And then finally, Matt was building houses in those days, and he traded out with some of his friends. So he did some work for them, and then they knew how to install heat, like a whole system. And so they did the labor for Matt because Matt had helped him do something else. Anyway, basically we paid cost, and that's how we got it. And then today, I'm like what Dale said, I'm so soft that I don't know that I could stand it without air conditioning. Of course I could, but it's just so nice and so wonderful to be able to lay down when it's cool, and even though it's really hot outside. So just so many changes and good to document for a variety of reasons. Another thing that kind of goes right along with that in this first part is that when he's describing the water, how they watered the cows and the horses, how they could kind of fend for themselves, but when it came to the hogs and the chickens, they had to supply the water, and how their daddy really treasured that, how his daddy really treasured that one spring that never went dry, even in a dry summer, so that he always had water. We don't think about things like that today, of course, because water comes out of our spigots. It's easy to get. But what a resource that would have been, that water, to have those springs. There's tons of springs here. And, of course, it's a different area and all that. I can't imagine a time when most of the springs here would dry up. But maybe they have in the past, and I've just never witnessed it. But that great pleasure of having that one spring. So you can see the value of that, and then compare it till today when most of us don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about where our water comes from. Just such a drastically different time. Also about them getting warm to get in the bed, and you've heard lots of stories, I'm sure, like that. If you've read any of the old stories or heard people talk about it, is where they would like kind of bake this side, bake that side, and then make a run for the bed. Also heard stories about people heating bricks or rocks and putting them in the foot of the bed so that it kind of warm it up, all those different things. Just such a drastically different time. Now, I have a heating pad in my bed at the bottom of my feet, and I really enjoy it. And I am very thankful. When I go to bed at night, I'm so thankful that I have a good mattress. I have nice blankets. I have the ability to wash it all and keep it really fresh and good, smelling, and change my sheets every week and all that. And I'm really thankful for that heating pad. I've had it literally for years. And it's just a comfort because it's warm. In Granny's old age, and she takes blood thinner, she freezes a lot, so we have her a heated blanket on her bed, and she really loves it. She's like me, she loves her bed, and is just really grateful that she has a nice warm place to sleep. And to go back to Dale, not that it hurt those kids, they were loved and grew up and all that, but still it makes you think, today I'm not sleeping with somebody's feet in my face either. We have room to spread out. Just so many different things, and to look at between then and now. That's why I love to look at the past, and a lot of it, like I said, I'm so grateful for, but then some of it I wish we had that camaraderie and that closeness of family. It took that closeness to make it in those days, because everyone, you had to depend on each other, for your families. And I'm sure that's part of what Dale wanted to do with this book. So I hope you'll leave a comment, though, and tell me what you enjoyed from this first part. I know you're really going to enjoy it. I just have really been blessed by the book since they sent it to me, and I'm so glad they did, or I would have never known about it, and I would have never been able to share it with you. So be sure to drop back by next Friday for the second part of Watermelon Hill.